Some families don't betray in the dark. They do it under bright lights with laughter in the air and glasses raised. At a father's birthday, one son gets publicly humiliated and told to pack his bags like he's nothing more than dead weight. And what hits hardest isn't the cruelty of one brother's words. It's the silence of everyone else. When the whole room cheers for it, this stops being family drama and becomes something uglier. A united decision to erase someone's place, their safety, their dignity, right in front of their own father. You teach people how to treat you. When respect dies at the table, what's the right move? Swallow it to keep the peace. Or respond in a way that draws a hard line and forces them to face what they've turned into. Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're tuning in from. It's always amazing to see where our stories travel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next twist in this journey. Now, let's listen to him from the heart. Looking back, it all feels like a different life. A timeline split by lost choices and a house that refused to let go. If you had met me 5 or 6 years ago, you'd have found a version of myself on the rise in Seattle, 26 and hungry. The kind of guy who drank black coffee, lived for late-night campaign launches, and measured his worth by project wins and LinkedIn recommendations. My apartment overlooked the gray-blue expanse of Elliott Bay. I had a girlfriend who worked at a nonprofit, a fantasy of maybe settling down one day if we both stopped working weekends. On the phone, my dad's voice always sounded older than I remembered, but I chalked it up to the miles and his stubborn reluctance to use FaceTime. My mother was the one who texted memes and photos of her blooming garden, who reminded me not to wait too long before visiting. Then came the call, my sister Tamsin's voice trembling on the line. The news about Mom's breast cancer, returning the late-night flights, the hospital rooms that reeked of antiseptic and denial. When she died, the silence in that house on Franklin Street became absolute. Dad drifted through the days, shuffling from his chair to the window and back again, sometimes forgetting to eat, sometimes letting the kitchen faucet run all night. I found myself ping-ponging across the country, burning vacation days and air miles, always thinking I could keep my life in Seattle and still be the good son. But after the third time I flew back and found unpaid bills stacked beside the fruit bowl, and Dad so thin I could see the bones in his wrist, the illusion crumbled. I remember the phone call from my brother Pierce as if it happened yesterday. His voice was brisk, layered with the kind of authority you get from years as a CFO, comfortable, untouchable, practiced in crisis management. "Cass, you need to get home. Dad's not doing well and I have a lot on my plate. You're more flexible. We just need someone there. You know, I asked if he'd visited lately." He deflected, talking about quarterly reports and who else would do it. I knew what he was really saying. I didn't have kids or a mortgage. I was the most convenient option for the family's loose ends. So I packed my life in cardboard, promising my boss I'd only be gone for a few weeks. I left my apartment keys with my girlfriend, who didn't say she'd wait, but didn't say goodbye either. Arriving at the family house in Old Town Alexandria was like stepping into a mausoleum curated by my mother's gentle touch. I found recipe cards in her looping cursive, a half-finished sweater on the arm of the couch, her favorite blue mug still on the drying rack. I took over the logistics, setting out Dad's meds each night, driving him to physical therapy, dealing with repairs and old pipes that groaned in the winter. I called doctors, organized insurance forms, scheduled checkups, paid taxes. I watched Dad slip between lucid days and moments of fog, sometimes mistaking me for my uncle or asking after Mom as if she'd just left for the market. The weeks bled into months. Seattle felt like another world. Eventually, the emails from work slowed, replaced by short take care notes and then silence. I didn't make any dramatic announcement. I just stopped forwarding my calls. My girlfriend called less and less, her voice sounding further away each time, until the last conversation when she asked, "Is this really your life now?" and I didn't have an answer. I became that person you hear about, but never see, the adult child who puts life on hold for a parent. In the mirror, I watched my ambition turn into something harder and quieter, a kind of stubborn love that didn't care how it looked. Pierce visited once that spring. He swept in wearing his tailored suit, holding a gift bag for Dad with a bottle of good whiskey, but he spent most of his visit tapping on his phone. He listened as I updated him on Dad's blood pressure, nodded at the mention of the neurologist, but his questions turned quickly. "What's the property tax here these days, Cass? You know, this neighborhood's gone up like crazy. Are the estate docs up to date? He asked if Dad had ever talked about updating his will, and I could feel his eyes measuring the house column's square footage potential. Tamsin called a few times, always polite, asking about Dad's spirits before inevitably circling around to, has he made any new plans for the house? I started feeling less like a son and more like a placeholder, the house sitter for a prize neither of them wanted to tend, but both wanted to claim. One night, going through a stack of Dad's papers looking for a medical bill, I found a jumble of documents in the bottom drawer, my mom's original deed, old insurance statements, and tucked between them a note in handwriting that wasn't Dad's update power of attorney. The phrase made the back of my neck prickle. I put everything back, but a restlessness settled in. Mom always said this house wasn't just a building. It's a haven, she told me, and whoever keeps it keeps the family. I remembered that standing in the kitchen with the hum of the fridge and the old clock ticking. But more and more I felt like I was squatting on shifting sand. Pierce had always liked to get ahead of things, especially paperwork. It occurred to me uncomfortably that being the one who stayed could just as easily make me a target as a hero. That night, as I turned off the downstairs lights, my phone buzzed with a text from Pierce. I'm coming back next month. There's some paperwork Dad needs to sign. Don't let it slip. At the time, I thought my battle was against Dad's loneliness, the weight of an old house, and a grief that wouldn't let go. I didn't realize yet that what was coming for me wasn't loss. It was a plan. 2 years before everything boiled over, the house seemed quieter, but beneath the surface, the pieces were shifting. It started with an appointment at the clinic in Arlington, just a routine checkup for Dad, but it would end up rewriting everything. That's when we met Serafina Vale. She was the kind of nurse who remembers everyone's birthday, who asks about the little things that matter. Dad was having a rough morning, confused and irritable, and she sat with him, talking softly, dropping my mother's name as if it was some magic spell. I caught the flicker in his eyes, the way grief and hope warred inside him. Serafina was attentive, quick to notice Dad's preferences, but she also peppered me with questions: who handled his schedule, which family member was around the most, who took care of the house. Her tone was warm, but clinical, as if she were collecting data rather than making conversation. Dad perked up after that visit. He wanted to get out of the house, try new restaurants, join a local book club for retirees. I wanted to be happy for him, I really did. But when Serafina began showing up with homemade soup and offers to drive Dad to his appointments, I started watching her closely. She settled into our routines, never overstepping at first. She offered to help with small chores, lining up his meds for the week, organizing the pillbox, running errands. She called herself a friend of the family, but I could tell she wanted more. I noticed how she positioned herself as the only one who got him, and how she seemed to need me out of the way. When Pierce called one night, his tone was softer than usual. Honestly, Cass, if she's willing to take care of Dad, you might want to start planning your return to Seattle. You deserve your own life. Tamsin echoed the same sentiment almost verbatim, as if someone had given her talking points. I could hear the relief in their voices. They wanted to be free of the obligation, even if it meant trading Dad's independence for their convenience. 6 months later, Dad told me he wanted to marry Serafina. The speed of it knocked me off balance, but I didn't push back. I was too afraid that saying no would send him spiraling again. They had a modest ceremony. Afterward, the atmosphere in the house began to warp. Serafina brought up marital privacy and asked if I'd mind moving into the smaller guest room. She redecorated shifting photos, boxing up my mother's keepsakes, adding her own framed certificates to the study wall. These old houses are a lot for Graham at his age, she'd say at dinner, her voice casual. Have you considered how much easier it would be to downsize, less taxes, fewer stairs? Maybe we should talk about selling. I caught a glimpse of her one afternoon, scrolling through listings for luxury condos on the Alexandria waterfront. She flipped her phone over as I walked by, smile tight. I wanted to believe I was being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that her gaze lingered too long on Zillow, not on Dad. It didn't take long before Pierce and Serafina started operating as a unit. He made more frequent trips from New York, but only when Dad was out at physical therapy. Once I walked in to find the two of them at the kitchen table, heads bent over a sheaf of paperwork labeled with phrases like power of attorney valuation and consultation. Serafina laughed when I asked about it, claiming it was just insurance stuff for Dad's protection. Pierce insisted I was being hypersensitive, but I saw the look that passed between them, a flicker of shared understanding. That evening, as I sorted recycling, I found a torn envelope from an estate services firm in Alexandria, the letter inside hastily shredded. When I asked Serafina, she waved it off. Probably junk mail. You know how these places are always sending stuff. My gut told me otherwise. I started a notebook logging every time Pierce showed up while Dad was away, every change in medication, every new friend Serafina brought around the house. I began to notice that Serafina was increasingly insistent about controlling Dad's meds and appointments, sometimes telling me not to bother, she'd got it covered. Sheila, our neighbor across the street, mentioned to me in passing that there had been a few strangers stopping to take pictures of the house. Maybe real estate scouts, she guessed. But I saw the glint in her eye. She was giving me a warning. Late one night, I stepped out onto the back porch for air and caught the tail end of Serafina's hushed phone call. Her back turned to the light. Yes, it's almost time. Just make sure he doesn't catch on. I didn't need to hear the rest. She wasn't talking about Dad. Somewhere between the clicks of her heels on the hardwood floor and the way she closed doors just a little too softly, I realized I wasn't just fighting for my father's comfort anymore. I was being played. And suddenly, I understood this wasn't about care or love or even family. It was about a house, a signature, and who would get to write the final chapter. There's a rhythm to suspicion, a slow, steady beat that grows louder as each new sign falls into place. 6 months before Dad's 70th birthday, our house in Old Town Alexandria began to feel less like a home and more like a stage set for something none of us wanted to name. Every evening after dinner, Serafina would brew a special tea just for Dad, a blend she claimed helped him sleep through the night. I watched him slip under its spell, his eyelids heavy before the end of Jeopardy, waking up confused about the day or the year. It started small, these episodes, but soon became routine. When I suggested a checkup, Serafina dismissed my concern with a strained smile. He's just getting older, Cassian. Let him rest. One afternoon, I opened Dad's weekly pill organizer and paused. There was an unfamiliar capsule tucked beside his heart medication, pale green and oblong, nothing like what I'd seen before. I asked Serafina, who bristled, assuring me that as a nurse, she knew exactly what Dad needed. Let me handle it. Too many cooks spoil the broth, she said, her tone edged with annoyance. But I couldn't let it go. That night, after everyone was asleep, I slipped one of the capsules into a small envelope, labeled it with the date, and hid it in the glove box of my car. The next morning, I called my old friend Juno Park, who worked at a nearby pharmacy. Juno agreed to meet me after her shift. Under the buzzing fluorescent lights, I handed over the pill and waited as she ran a quick check. She frowned, shaking her head. Cassian, this is a strong sedative not prescribed for your dad. Whoever's giving him this isn't just helping him sleep. This is the kind of medication that makes someone compliant foggy. My heart thudded. I realized in that moment that what I'd taken for natural decline might be manufactured. The realization felt like falling through ice. Meanwhile, odd things kept happening around the house. Sheila, our neighbor, mentioned she'd seen a man with a measuring tape walking the property, snapping photos of our front porch, checking the basement windows. When I asked Serafina, she said a friend was considering a home renovation and wanted ideas for layouts. Later, I found a torn real estate brochure in the kitchen trash pages showing luxury condos in downtown Alexandria. The photo of a smiling couple in a high-rise seemed to mock me. Pierce visited more often, always timing his arrivals for when Dad was at therapy or napping. One afternoon, I walked into the kitchen to find Pierce and Serafina leaning over a spreadsheet discussing facility options, listing commissions, and liquid assets. When they noticed me, Pierce's tone shifted, reassuring but condescending. Cass, you're reading too much into this. You need to think about your own life, not just Dad's. But I couldn't look away anymore. Dad started complaining about his bank account, how money seemed to disappear even though he hadn't bought anything out of the ordinary. Serafina brushed it off, claiming she managed his online banking for convenience. I started snapping photos of every odd transaction, consulting fees, management services, small transfers I couldn't explain. The final confirmation arrived one rainy Tuesday when I was helping Dad with a new phone app. Swiping through his photo gallery, I found a recent image of a power of attorney document, Pierce's name featured prominently. Dad blinked at the screen, puzzled. I don't remember taking that photo. Must have been the day Serafina made that new tea. I slept nearly all afternoon. He couldn't recall signing anything or even discussing it. The weight of what was happening pressed down on me. They weren't just talking about taking control. They were preparing the paperwork to do it. After dinner that night, I sat in the garage with the capsule and the phone in my hand. I could hear laughter through the kitchen window, Pierce and Serafina chatting as if nothing were wrong. I understood then that if I raised my voice in that house, if I let my anger show, they'd cast me as the troublemaker, the greedy son desperate to hang on to the house for himself. I needed more than suspicion. I needed facts and a plan. I pulled out the folder where I kept Mom's old legal files and started mapping out a timeline the days Pierce appeared, the nights Dad slept too deeply, the moments Serafina stepped into the role of caretaker and quietly took over the rest. The evidence was scattered but real. I knew what I had to do. I scrolled through my phone to Uncle Dorian's number, paused, then found Rowan Klein's contact just below. My thumb hovered over the call button. This wasn't about feelings anymore. It was about survival for Dad, for the house, for the truth. The next morning I made 2 calls that would change the trajectory of everything. Uncle Dorian answered first, his voice steady and practical as always. I explained the sedative, the strange transactions, the document on Dad's phone. He didn't ask about my feelings. Instead, he went right to logistics. Write down every date. Who was present? Was your father alert? Do you have the pill? Don't confront anyone. Gather your proof. Don't let them see you coming. Armed with his advice, I met with Rowan Klein in a brick office near King Street. Rowan listened carefully as I laid out the sequence, the new pills, the paperwork, Serafina's sudden control. This isn't a family spat, Rowan said quietly. It's elder abuse, plain and simple. Here's what you need: a third-party medical assessment on a day when your father's clear-headed. You need legal documents, a healthcare proxy, a new power of attorney with restricted authority, and a signed statement from your father about his wishes, all properly witnessed and stored. Most importantly, you need evidence, photos, timelines, witnesses. He warned me that if Pierce and Serafina were planning to sell, they'd likely use a big family event like Dad's birthday to pressure him into signing everything at once, surrounded by people who'd support their story. With a growing sense of urgency, I arranged an appointment with Dr. Annika Deshmukh, an independent geriatrician. I brought Dad in on a bright morning when he was at his sharpest. Dr. Annika conducted a full cognitive assessment, confirming that while Dad had some mild age-related memory loss, he was perfectly competent when taking his proper medications. She noted that introducing unprescribed sedatives could create artificial symptoms of dementia, clouding his judgment and potentially invalidating any recent legal signatures. Her findings became the first stone in the wall I was building. Juno continued helping on her end, checking pharmacy records for any unusual activity. She traced the sedative back to a single prescription filled under a name we didn't recognize. Likely someone helping Serafina, or perhaps a sympathetic doctor willing to look the other way. The pattern was clear: these pills didn't just show up in our house by accident. Someone wanted Dad subdued. Rowan drafted a new set of legal documents, a healthcare proxy granting decision-making power jointly to me and Uncle Dorian, a limited power of attorney requiring both our signatures for any major actions, and a formal statement of Dad's wish to remain in his home with in-home care as needed. We chose a day when Serafina was out. She'd gone to a wellness seminar in Arlington, though I doubted the meeting existed. Dad signed everything in Rowan's presence with Dr. Annika and a notary as witnesses. The originals went into Rowan's office safe. I made copies and hid them in the old toolbox Dad kept in the garage, a place Serafina never touched. Meanwhile, Sheila from across the street sent me photos she'd taken of a man in a suit pacing our sidewalk, tape measure in hand, snapping pictures of the windows and jotting notes on a clipboard. I printed the photos and filed them away with the rest of my evidence. The pieces fit together: Serafina's casual mentions of downsizing, Pierce's spreadsheet calculations, the parade of unfamiliar faces assessing the house like a prize on the market. At home, Serafina's tone grew sharper. During dinner, she'd hint to Dad that maybe I should focus on my own future, that it was time for Cassian to move on. When Dad went to bed, her mask slipped entirely. You can't stay here forever. Pierce knows how to take care of your father's future. You, on the other hand, are just getting in the way. I bit back my response. Let her underestimate me. The more confident she grew, the more careless her moves. Rowan's warnings echoed in my mind. He told me that in cases like these, it was common for abusers to stage a signing at a big family event, using the presence of friends and relatives to pressure the target into compliance. I saw it coming now, the crescendo set for Dad's birthday when the house would be full, the atmosphere celebratory, and the opportunity for manipulation at its peak. Juno confirmed what I feared. The sedatives appeared in Dad's pillbox regularly, never by accident, always timed for days when big conversations about paperwork were scheduled. Whoever orchestrated this was careful, but not perfect. One evening, Sheila and Ben waved me over as I took out the trash. They handed me their phone, showing me a video of the suited stranger measuring our front walk. Looks like someone's making plans you haven't agreed to, Ben muttered. I thanked them, adding the video to my growing collection of evidence. Late that night, after Dad went to bed, I scrolled through his phone and found a new calendar event I hadn't created. Notary appointment scheduled for a Thursday afternoon when I'd be out buying groceries. The invite hadn't come from me or Dad. It was a glaring sign that the pressure was mounting. The window for action narrowing. That night, I finally set up the cameras Rowan had advised, small, unobtrusive, covering the kitchen, the study, and the entryway. As I checked the feeds from my laptop, I realized that the next few months wouldn't just be about caring for Dad or saving a house. They would be about documenting every move, preparing for the day when everything would come to a head. As I turned off the lights, I rehearsed my own plan for Dad's birthday, not just a celebration, but a checkpoint, a turning point, the day I would be ready to fight back with more than just my word. By the time summer leaned into fall, the pressure inside the house became visible, like cracks spreading through old plaster. 3 or 4 months before my father's 70th birthday, Serafina stopped pretending that we were on the same side. I finished installing the cameras one quiet afternoon while she was out, placing them only in common areas, exactly as Rowan had instructed. Within the first week, they caught what my instincts had been screaming for months. Late at night, Serafina stood at the kitchen counter, opened my father's pill organizer, and calmly rearranged the contents. She removed one capsule, replaced it with another, then slid the box back into the drawer as if nothing had happened. I didn't confront her. I copied the footage, encrypted it, and stored it where she couldn't reach. Not long after, I saw her begin a different campaign. At the senior center, where she now insisted on taking my father twice a week, she leaned into conversations with other spouses and staff, her voice pitched just loud enough. She talked about how overwhelmed I seemed, how I snapped too easily, how burnout made people irrational. I stood a few feet away listening as my reputation was quietly rewritten. She wasn't trying to fight me directly. She was eroding my credibility, one comment at a time. Pierce arrived one Friday afternoon carrying glossy brochures for Riverstone Harbor Senior Living, a high-end facility overlooking the Potomac. He spoke to my father gently, outlining all the amenities, the safety, the freedom it would give me. I watched my father's shoulders slump as Pierce framed the conversation around burden and inevitability. "You don't want to hold Cassian back," Pierce said, as if this were a kindness. I realized then that the goal wasn't just to sell the house. It was to make my father believe leaving it was his idea. Tamsin followed suit. On a video call, she repeated Pierce's phrases almost word for word, accusing me of being controlling, of keeping Dad to myself, because I was afraid of losing my place. Hearing it out loud stung more than I expected. It was one thing to fight Serafina. It was another to see my own sister recruited into the story they were telling. The financial pressure came next. I brought Dad to the local bank under the pretense of reviewing a small charge he didn't recognize. The teller pulled up his account history and pointed out a pattern of recurring transfers to a financial consulting entity. When I asked who authorized them, she explained that only the most recent authorized agent could make changes. The implication was clear: paperwork already existed that could shut me out completely. The most brazen move came disguised as politeness. I noticed a notary appointment on Dad's calendar scheduled for a time when Serafina insisted I run errands. "I'll handle it," she said lightly. "Just some care-related forms." I pretended to agree, then circled back early. Through the front window, I saw Pierce seated with a stranger at the dining table, documents spread out, my father slumped in his chair, eyes unfocused. I interrupted with a simple excuse about lunch. While they regrouped, I snapped a photo of the document cover and caught the notary's name. I sent everything straight to Rowan. Rowan's response was immediate and grim. This wasn't over. If anything, it meant they were accelerating. He warned me they would try again in a setting where I'd be outnumbered and pressured into silence. Uncle Dorian agreed. They'll pick a day when no one wants to make a scene, he said. A celebration. That night, as I cleared the printer tray, a page caught my eye. An email confirmation. Kent Halberg confirmed attendance. I didn't recognize the name. A moment later, Serafina's laptop screen lit up on the kitchen counter. A message preview flashed before it dimmed. Make sure he has the tea before the toast. My hands went cold. I finally understood that the birthday wasn't just a date on the calendar. It was their chosen moment. The weeks leading up to the birthday felt like running through fog with a clock ticking somewhere behind me. Serafina grew suspicious, commenting on strange noises, asking if I'd installed new devices. I laughed it off, blaming the router and the old wiring, but when I checked the feeds, I saw brief outages where the signal dropped. I backed everything up that same night, moving copies off-site just as Rowan had taught me. Pierce made another attempt to seize control, suggesting a new medical evaluation with a doctor he trusted, someone who could document a sharper cognitive decline. I refused outright. Pierce accused me of manipulation, of keeping Dad trapped. Rowan was firm when I told him. Don't let them create competing medical records, he said. That's how they box you in. Uncle Dorian arrived a few days later, pale but determined. He spent an afternoon alone with my father during one of his clearer windows. When they emerged, Dad looked shaken but resolved. He admitted that there were days he signed papers he barely remembered, days blurred by sleep and confusion. He told Dorian and later me that he wanted to stay in his home, that he didn't want to be moved like furniture. I reinforced that clarity with another visit to Dr. Annika, who documented my father's stable condition on his proper medications and reiterated her availability if needed. Meanwhile, a stack of printed drafts appeared on the printer listing strategies, commission outlines, staging plans. The name Kent Halberg surfaced repeatedly. When I compared his name to the photos Sheila had taken of the man measuring our property, the match was undeniable. This wasn't theory anymore. It was logistics. I began shaping the birthday carefully, inviting people who had known my father for years, neighbors and old colleagues who could recognize when something was off. I put together a photo album tracing his life, keeping him engaged and grounded. I avoided anything that could be misrepresented as manipulation. Rowan walked me through every possible scenario. What to say first, which document to present, when to stop the proceedings, when to call for medical confirmation. The plan was precise, almost clinical. He emphasized one thing above all: don't argue. Let them expose themselves. The final confirmation came the night before the party. Pierce's message flashed across the shared screen in the living room. Tomorrow we finish this. Have Kent ready. I stood there long after the screen went dark, looking at my father asleep on the couch. The staircase behind him lined with family photos. My mother's smile frozen in time. They thought they were staging a celebration. They thought they were cornering me. What they didn't know was that everything they needed to defeat themselves was already in place. And all it would take at the right moment was one phone call. The morning of my father's 70th birthday arrived exactly as I expected it to, quiet on the surface, charged underneath. I woke before sunrise and moved through the house with deliberate calm, preparing food, setting out plates, arranging the living room so everything looked like a celebration instead of a courtroom. I kept my father engaged from the moment he came downstairs, talking him through breakfast, handing him his medication myself, making sure every pill matched the prescription. I needed him present, anchored for as long as possible. Serafina hovered nearby with an energy that didn't fit the occasion. She insisted on handling drinks, kept glancing at the clock, kept drifting back toward the kitchen as if guarding a control panel. I checked the cameras one last time, confirmed the backups were intact, then let the day unfold. Pierce arrived earlier than anyone else, carrying a gift bag that felt like an afterthought. He scanned the house the way an appraiser would, his eyes measuring space flow opportunity. Tamsin followed soon after and positioned herself beside him without even realizing it, already speaking in the careful language of safety and practicality. When Kent Halberg walked in dressed like he was heading to a boardroom instead of a birthday party, the picture finally completed itself. The stiff portfolio in his hand didn't belong in a room filled with balloons and photo albums. The neighbors and my father's old friends arrived next. They brought warmth with them, stories, shared memories, laughter that pulled my father into the present. I watched his posture straighten when someone mentioned a bridge he'd designed years ago, watched his eyes light up when he recognized faces from his past. That was the tether I needed in place. Serafina made her move just before the cake. She handed my father a drink she described as something to help him relax, her tone practiced and sweet. I didn't stop her. I noted the time instead. Within minutes, his speech slowed, his focus drifted. Pierce noticed immediately. Kent shifted closer. Pierce tapped his glass and began his speech, his voice smooth, rehearsed. He praised my father, talked about responsibility, about the future. Then he produced documents talking about decisions already made, about arrangements finalized. When he turned to me, the mask slipped. "Pack your bags, loser," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "This house is going up for sale." A few people raised their glasses, uncertain, but following the lead they'd been given. Tamsin lifted hers automatically. My father looked at me confused, asking about the trip I'd mentioned weeks earlier, the one I hadn't given him yet. Pierce cut him off with a laugh, dismissing it as another impractical idea. I didn't argue, I didn't defend myself. I walked straight out the front door onto the porch and made one phone call. Rowan answered before the second ring. I told him exactly what was happening, nothing more. He said he was on the way. Uncle Dorian and Dr. Annika were already close. 10 minutes later, the front door opened again. Rowan stepped inside first, followed by Dorian and Dr. Annika. The room froze. Kent was mid-motion, opening his portfolio. Pierce was holding a pen. Rowan's voice cut cleanly through the tension, instructing everyone to stop. He announced the existence of binding healthcare and decision-making documents, named Dorian and me as authorized agents, and warned that any attempt to proceed would carry consequences. Pierce exploded, shouting that I was a parasite, that I was manipulating the situation. Serafina joined in, accusing me of surveillance, of sabotage, her voice rising as the plan unraveled in front of witnesses. Dr. Annika approached my father, calmly asked his consent, and began a brief evaluation. She explained the need for testing the signs she was observing. Rowan presented copies of the documents Pierce claimed to supersede, explaining precisely why they did not. When Kent realized the situation he'd walked into, his confidence vanished. Rowan made it clear what continued involvement would imply. Kent closed his portfolio and stepped back, announcing he was withdrawing. Tamsin finally spoke, asking Pierce why there were unfamiliar medications involved, why a real estate agent was here at all. Serafina, cornered and frantic, lost control. She shouted about money, about plans, about what she'd been promised. Every word landed like a confession. The shouting escalated, overlapping accusations filling the room. My father gripped my hand, his focus returning as the fog lifted. The celebration collapsed into truth. I watched it all in silence. I hadn't needed to fight. I had only needed to let them talk. The next day began with paperwork instead of apologies. Rowan filed emergency motions before noon, freezing any attempt to transfer property or access accounts. The bank complied once the documentation was presented. Transactions stopped, lines of credit locked. Dr. Annika's results arrived shortly after. The presence of medication that had never been prescribed was documented clearly and professionally. It reframed everything. What had been dismissed as family disagreement now carried a different weight. Protective Services opened an inquiry. They interviewed neighbors, reviewed footage, examined records. The pattern was impossible to ignore once laid out in order. Serafina was removed from the house. Locks were changed. Access revoked. Pierce's financial maneuvers surfaced next. Regular transfers, structured just small enough to avoid notice, led back to arrangements he'd orchestrated. Tamsin confronted him and finally saw the story she'd been repeating collapse under evidence. My father recovered steadily once his medication was corrected. His speech sharpened. His memory stabilized. He set boundaries with a clarity I hadn't seen in years. Weeks turned into months. Legal consequences followed their course. Some relationships didn't survive. Others slowly began to mend. The house remained. Quiet again. Whole. And that's where his story lands after the shouting, after the phone call, after the moment the room finally realized they weren't just making a joke. Sometimes the sharpest wound isn't losing a thing. It's watching the people who should protect someone clap while it happens. And when that kind of disrespect is served like dessert at a family table, it changes what a person is willing to tolerate. What we can hold on to together is this. We don't get to choose the family we were born into, but we do get to choose what we accept and what we walk away from. Boundaries aren't cruelty. They're clarity. And even when a situation is messy, choosing dignity can still leave room for compassion without handing our peace back to the people who broke it. If you'd like to stay with us, subscribe and come back for the next story. And if you feel comfortable, leave a few lines in the comments where you're listening from or the moment you knew you had to draw a line. Thanks for spending this time with us. Take care, and we'll see you soon.